manager is pretty much like the president of a small company, where the shareholders really want to focus on being creative. In this case, it's making music, but it could just as easily be designing ball bearings. They just want to go be creative.
Right.
And they either don't have the time or the talent or the inclination to run the day-to-day business. So essentially they hire somebody, except in this case, it's not somebody inside their company. They hire an outside person basically to run their company for them, run the day-to-day operations of their company. And that's really what a manager is. You run the company.
The day-to-day operations.
Manager is not Rumpelstiltskin, does not turn straw into gold,
right,
for starters. What's going to define whether an artist is successful really has a lot more to do with the artist than it does with the manager. Mm-hmm. I mean, managers obviously like to think what they do is important. You know, I've certainly contributed to the success of some of my clients, but I didn't make them huge. They made themselves huge.
Okay.
But what I did was I kept them from making bad decisions. I advised them. I mean, a manager's power inside the relationship with the artist is really the power to persuade. It's most of the time it's not, and it definitely shouldn't be the power to make the decisions. The big decisions are to be made by the artist.
So when you say the manager's job is not to turn, they're not Rumpelstiltskin. They're not going to turn straw into gold. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about what the artist brings to the table to begin with.
Yeah.
What about the notion that the manager is supposed to play a role in developing that straw, helping to develop it to where it actually has more value than what it is?
Well, I mean, this is a really good question, Gian. Managers can play so many different kinds of roles inside the relationship. There are times when managers just view themselves as, you know, business. I'm going to do business. I'm not going to tell you, you know, how to write your songs. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to tell you how to sing. And there are a lot of artists that don't want to hear that from their manager. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they do, you know. Okay. So it really depends on the individuals. Okay. I mean, I've had clients who would have been outraged had I really pushed them hard to for their music to be a certain way.
Someone said to me many years ago with regard to personal management that ultimately the success of the relationship comes down to respect.
And trust.
And trust.
Yeah, I think so.
And trust is a part of respect. The two are intertwined. Yeah. How important is that? How important is that and why?
Well, the trust is important because an artist is giving a manager an enormous amount of authority, you know, basically to represent the artist to the world. I mean, frequently, at least in the business world, the manager is the face of the artist. So as an artist, you really need to believe that the manager has your best interests in mind, that you can really trust the person. And also you can trust his judgment, that he's not going to make stupid decisions on your behalf, that he's going to represent you in the way that you want to be represented.
Right.
Yeah.
And let's speak to the respect part a little bit. And what I'm finding when I talk to people in many different circles is that sometimes the manager feels as though the artist does not respect them. And I say, if the manager doesn't feel respected, usually it's because the artist doesn't really know what they do. Mm-hmm. What has been your experience in that regard?
I try to let my clients know what I do. You know, I welcome them. You want to sit in a meeting? You want to listen to my half of a telephone conversation? You want to see the emails that run? How much do you want to be copied on everything? Okay. I want them to know what I do. And most of what I do is marshaling resources on their behalf. And if they're at a very, very early stage of their career, the chances are that nobody can afford to marshal the resources, so it's mostly going to come from me.
Right.
And managers of artists at very early stages in their career end up essentially doing everything. You know, sometimes they end up booking the shows, although in California, at least you're not supposed to do that. You know, they end up as the tour manager, they end up as the accountant, right. You know, they end up as, you know, as the sole marketer. Mm-hmm. You know, they can spend 15 hours a day doing nothing but sending out email blasts. You got to do everything.
How important is it to discuss expectations with an artist before you take them on?
Oh, extremely. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, I think the difference between artist expectations and reality ruins a lot of relationships with managers. And I mean, I have pretty strong feelings about this, and I've come at this from all angles. I started out my career as a signed artist, played in a very successful band for several years. So I've been through all of this. I know the inflated expectations that a lot of artists have. And I know how badly they get treated at early parts of their career at the same time. So it's kind of a funny dichotomy. But a lot of artists just assume that they are fabulously talented. And I guess they have to, because it's a tough way to make a living, and the chances of success are very slim. And so you deal with a lot of slights early in your career. So I guess you really, really need to believe in yourself.
Is it a matter of defining the expectations or managing them, or both?
Well, I try to be really honest with my clients. One of the things that happens, especially as they start to get successful and labels start coming around, is that the labels all sing a song to them about how huge they're likely to be and how much the label really loves them, and how much they're going to make them an enormous priority. And what the people from the labels never say is that it's very hard for them to figure out who's going to be really successful and who isn't. It's just, it's tough to pick it. And consequently, they oversign. And they sign more artists than they could possibly market and promote effectively. And the end result of that is a lot of records never come out, especially these days. And of the records that come out, relatively few of them are going to get the full attention of the label. And yet the label can't possibly say, or think they can't possibly say that to the new artists, because they just wouldn't go there. So consequently, they tell them how much attention they're going to get. And the end result are crushed expectations and broken hearts and shattered careers. Okay, and so
that sounds to me like it's a matter of managing all the expectations from a multitude of areas.
Yeah, so what I try to say to my artists is, look, the chances of, unless you're one of these rare talents that comes around, maybe every 5 or 10 years, and there are those, people who are just completely undeniable, but there are relatively few of those. Other than that, you're sort of casting your fate to the wind. The chances that you're going to get past your second album or third album, statistically, are, I don't know, maybe 20%. Which means there's an 80% chance that you're going to get that major label deal, your records are going to come out and not do very well, and you're going to get dropped.
Right.
That's just the reality. That's what you signed up for. And you decided not to be an accountant. You decided to be a musician. And it's more fun being a musician than it is being a lawyer.
Right.
Trust me. Or a manager. Trust me. It really is. But the chances of your being really successful are small. So you got to work your ass off, number one. And number two, realize that the world is not likely just to come to your door with their arms open and say, oh God, we love you.
Right, right. You got to go out there and kick their door down.
Yeah.
Right, right. There's a, with regard to managing expectations, there is another component to this which I'm finding to be very interesting in the last 5 to 10 years. Attending the California Lawyers for the Arts Music Business Seminar, and to discover that Dina LaPolte is now doing management and now responsible for directing or co-directing the career of Steve Tyler from Aerosmith. And just more and more attorneys I'm seeing are getting into management. Now, your background is as an attorney. You went to Columbia University and majored in jurisprudence, correct?
Well, actually, that was while I was at Bolt.
You were at Bolt.
At Berkeley's law school.
Right. And so you did the law.
Yeah.
And then you ended up managing. So law first, then management. Well, actually being an artist, law, then management.
Actually it was, and but the management and the lawyering came within about a year or so of each other.
So they're very close.
2 years. It was very close. And what happened is that I had a legal client who had fired their manager, and they needed a manager, and my job was to go out and look for one.
Okay.
And I kept trying to find them a manager, and I couldn't find them.
And you couldn't find them.
I couldn't find them a really good manager, and they kept saying, well, how about you? And I would say, well, it's really not my kind of music.
So, and that is my question. That is my question. And the question is the reasons why there are so many attorneys who are getting into management now is because there's such a shallow pool of qualified managers, or does the attorney Does the manager with the attorney background just bring so much more to the table?
Well, I think you bring a lot to the table. I mean, managers come from various backgrounds. There are some who've come from a legal background. Some who've come from a production background. There are a bunch who've come from a tour managing background. There are some who've just come from a straight business background. There are all sorts of ways that you can do it well. But I think the reason that lawyers, it's a lot more fun being a manager of a successful act than it is being a lawyer. It just is.
Okay.
Being a manager of an act that's doing really well is a great job. And it can be very lucrative. I mean, much more lucrative than being a lawyer.
So the manager who has a legal background,
Mm-hmm.
now the artist is getting what I perceive as a 2-for-1, because inevitably there's going to be legal issues that have to be taken care of.
Yes. Although both that act and the manager are well advised that the band also have another lawyer.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Now, why is that?
Because I mean, my feeling is that if you're acting both as manager and as lawyer, you just got too much power in your hands.
Okay.
And the artist really is entitled to a completely independent legal opinion. So, for example, almost all of the time when I've been a manager, the artist has had another lawyer. The only time that was not the case, I was kind of the second banana manager and also acting as the lawyer, but I didn't really call the shots.
Okay.
But most of the time, sometimes I've started out as the lawyer. The artist and I have decided that we're going to change the relationship. The first thing I've said is, go out and find another lawyer, and here's 5 or 6 suggestions of experienced music business attorneys.
Wow, wow, and that is your personal preference. That's just how you choose to deal with that situation, or are you finding that to be an industry norm?
That's an industry norm, I
Okay.
think.
Okay.
Yeah, because one of the things, you're just also looking for trouble. If there's a busted relationship, and you've also been acting as the attorney. Attorneys, believe it or not, are held to extraordinarily high standards of conduct.
Right.
And you're just, if you're acting as both, you're really
opening yourself
up.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about the viewers who see this tape.
Mm-hmm.
Those who have interests and aspirations of becoming professional personal managers.
Mm-hmm.
What do you suggest that they do to make that a reality?
Well, there are a couple of ways to go about this. One of them is essentially to work with an experienced manager and learn the trade that way. And there aren't that many successful personal managers around, and most of them are probably in the big media centers of Los Angeles and New York and Nashville. And so you might want to move there and see if you can, find a way to get a job working for one of them and learn it from the ground up like that.
Yeah, yeah. The whole idea of apprenticeship.
Mm-hmm.
But you're talking about moving to one of the major music industry capitals.
Okay.
But even here in the Bay Area, if somebody were here in the Bay Area, and I get a lot of students at San Francisco State
Mm-hmm.
that say, I want to get into personal management. I can think of at least 4 students who I know who are really interested in that, and they've done the necessary training in terms of their education. But they just feel as though the number of managers who could bring them under their wing, they just have difficulties connecting with them. So,
Well, there aren't a lot of them to connect with, unfortunately. They can afford to pay them anything.
Gotcha.
So that means you got to do it. You're suggesting do it yourself, right? Which means you got to go find an act that you want to manage. So that means going to a lot of clubs. That means listening to a lot of music. And that means, being brave enough to approach artists, find out if they have a manager or not, and start to work with them.
Do you advise a student, someone coming out of, like, say, Expressions or even the MRI program at San Francisco State, they got their MRI certificate in management, and they're like, look, I heard you guys are good, you got some buzz, you got all these YouTube views, you got all this press,
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to manage you. In that scenario, what do you think that the prospective manager should be aware of when approaching an act with that proposition?
Well, the manager should be aware of the fact that the artist probably has very high expectations and really thinks that if we just had the right manager, there'd be no holding us back, and would probably prefer to get somebody from Q Prime to manage them, and that it's going to be a hard sell.
Okay. What is your philosophy on personal managers that invest financially in music artists? I've met a lot of managers, and it seems like down the middle, some are like, I absolutely would never do it. Some say, well, there are certain instances in which I have to do it. Mm-hmm. What's your take?
Sometimes you got to do it. If you really, really care about an artist of yours and they're really struggling financially, sometimes you got to do it. And you just got to realize you're doing it, and there's a decent chance you're never going to get your money back. But it's just an investment that you're willing to make in one of the careers of your clients.
Well, that kind of goes back to expectations. And just what I'm noticing is that more recently, some artists are actually expecting that. Whereas once upon a time, they were expecting for you to get the record deal, which brought about a certain amount of investment anyway.
And now the record deals are much scarcer and much smaller than they ever were before, and so it's harder, and the money has to come from somewhere. Sometimes it's the manager. I think there are a lot more outside investors now than there ever were before, certainly in my experience.
Okay. And your take on that is to?
Well, I mean, if you look at a musical artist as a business, just let's take away the artistic side for a second. It's just a business like any other business, and it needs to be adequately capitalized in order to succeed. And the money's got to come from somewhere. So the question is, where's it coming from?
Where is it coming from?
Yeah.
Right.
Sometimes there's just no outside investors, and sometimes as a manager, you just got to suck it up and, just take the chance.
Suck it up and dish it out.
Yeah, because, I mean, it's already a big chance. Because the chances are, I mean, if the artist doesn't make money, the manager doesn't make money, and the manager has expenses, so the manager's going to lose money representing a young artist a lot of times. And now if you're coming up with some investment capital on top of it.
I just want to ask you a couple of questions about what it is that you've learned. This is some name association, okay? I've mentioned an artist, and you tell me what you've learned. Okay. What did you learn from your experience with Wapale?
One of the things I've learned is that you can't manage everybody. And I love Wapale, and I still work with her as an attorney. But I just was the wrong person to be managing her because I was too old and, too white. Just in terms of, I mean, not in terms of my musical taste, really. And I just didn't understand her music well enough.
Too white. Yeah, I guess one could also be too black, That's interesting.
I mean, she's a real hip hop fan, and I'm not.
Right.
And I have strong feelings about the kind of songwriting that starting with a hip hop perspective causes, because it's so heavily beat oriented and rhythm oriented and not melody oriented that you end up with songs that are based on 4-bar loops or 8-bar loops, and I just don't think that makes for inherently interesting songs. It's my taste, She loves that stuff, and so
stripped down.
Yeah, and so I want songs with chord patterns that are different in the verses from the choruses, that have bridges, and that wasn't that important to her. And so I think my advice on an artistic level wasn't great advice. So
it wasn't great advice for her.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it took me a while to realize that. And then we both just reached an accommodation that I'm not the right person, but she really trusts me and has faith in me, and I really like her and think she's a terrific singer. Right. And we just changed the relationship.
What about Green Day? What did you learn there?
Oh, what I learned from Green Day. Oh my goodness. I've learned a lot. I learned, that I had the capability of being a great manager. I also learned that I really had to pay more attention to what my clients really wanted than what I thought was good for them. I mean, I think that was the hardest lesson for
Pay
me.
more attention to what they wanted.
Right, than what I wanted for them.
What you wanted for them.
Yeah.
Now that's deep. That's important.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because as a manager, you're really serving your clients. You got to remember that.
Okay. The manager serves the clients.
Yeah.
Okay. So we get to the point of this interview. I would like for you to give some crash course tips.
Crash course tips.
Crash
Okay.
course tips to our audience about various aspects of management, whether it's getting into management or whatever criteria they should use to select a manager that might guide their career.
Okay. So crash course tips. The first question is, should you be a manager? It sounds like a lot of fun. Should you do it? Well, there are a couple of skills that you need. And one of them is really the ability to manage other people, because that's a lot of the job. If you've got a band that's signed, you're going to be dealing with record companies, you're going to be dealing with agents, you're going to be dealing with publishers, with merchandising companies, with promoters, with crew. And you basically need to manage them on behalf of your clients. So if you're not good at that, you're probably not going to be a good manager. Second of all, if you've decided you've really done it, you need to hone a set of skills. And you can come at it from all sorts of different angles. I mean, I've come at it from being a lawyer, so I'm a pretty skilled negotiator. In terms of realism, important to understand that managers are in this to make money. It's their career. You may be willing to do it for next to nothing, just because it's so much fun to be a musician, and because there's always that dream that's kept alive. But they're in it much more as business people. So they need to make money. If they're not making money, then they're not going to be terribly happy with the situation.
Well, that wraps it up, Elliot.
Good.
I want to thank you so much for your time. And
John, my pleasure, as always.
Thank you so much.